It's the final morning of 1942 in the Arctic Circle. Low light filters through the overcast sky as snow flurries drift over convoy GW-51B, 14 merchant ships pushing east toward the Soviet Union. On the bridge of HMS Onslow, Captain Robert Sherbrooke scans the frozen horizon. His destroyers spread out in loose formation, the sea flat and deceptively calm. Somewhere beyond the haze, German surface raiders are expected. Orders are clear: protect the convoy at all costs. To the north, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper and her escorting destroyers creep closer. Southward, Lützow advances in tandem, ready to spring the trap. Neither side knows just how close the other is. Aboard the British ships, radar screens flicker and operators brace for contact. Engines strain, smoke screens are readied. Suddenly, dark shapes emerge through the haze, unidentified, closing fast. Guns are brought to readiness. The moment has arrived. The Battle of the Barents Sea is about to begin. By the closing weeks of 1942, the strategic situation in the Arctic sea lanes had reached a tense equilibrium, unstable and deeply precarious. The Arctic convoys, those treacherous Allied lifelines between Britain and the Soviet Union, were being pushed through hellish winter conditions and ever-present Axis threats. The Royal Navy, stretched thin by global commitments, had maintained a rhythm of escorting convoys northward through the freezing Atlantic and Barents Sea, supplying Soviet forces on the Eastern Front with critical material. The convoys bore numbers instead of names, PQ and QP. After the losses of convoy PQ-17 and PQ-18 earlier that year, they had been renamed JW for eastbound and RA for return journeys, in a vain attempt to throw off German codebreakers. For the German High Command, 1942 had been a year of mounting frustration at sea. Hitler's confidence in his surface fleet had been shaken by the loss of Bismarck and a series of costly operations in northern waters. Although the Channel Dash had brought some ships to safety, their continued vulnerability and lack of strategic impact strengthened Hitler's view that surface units were liabilities compared to the submarine fleet. By December 1942, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper and Lützow was stationed at Altenfjord in northern Norway under the command of Vice Admiral Oskar Kummitz. These surface units were among the last capital ships available to the Kriegsmarine in the Arctic theatre. Meanwhile, the Allied convoy system's survival depended on secrecy, coordination, and increasingly, courage. In the closing days of 1942, convoy JW-51B became the focus of an encounter that would pit Royal Navy escort ingenuity against the German Kriegsmarine's desperate attempt to turn the tide. The convoy had sailed from Loch Ewe, Scotland on December 22nd, consisting of 14 merchant ships loaded with 202 tanks, over 2,000 vehicles, more than 120 aircraft, fuel, and 54,000 tons of war supplies bound for the Soviet Union. Its escort consisted of a strong but largely destroyer-based screen. The core of the escort force was led by Captain Robert St. Vincent Sherbrooke aboard HMS Onslow. His immediate formation, known as the Close Escort, included 5 additional destroyers: Obedient, Orwell, Obdurate, Oribe, and Achates. These were supported by the corvettes Rhododendron and Hyderabad, the minesweeper Bramble, and the trawlers Visalma and Northern Gem. Beyond the close escort, the convoy was covered by 2 separate layers of support: the heavier distant cover group, comprising the battleship HMS Anson, the cruiser HMS Cumberland, and 3 destroyers, had sailed a few days later from Akureyri, Iceland, with the purpose of intercepting any German heavy units that might slip past the initial escort screen. Closer to the convoy, a more responsive striking force operated under Rear Admiral Robert Burnett. This group, known as Force R, included the radar-equipped cruisers HMS Sheffield and HMS Jamaica, supported by 2 destroyers. Despite thick winter fog, high seas, and intermittent snow squalls, the convoy initially made steady progress. Temperatures plunged well below freezing, and ships became heavily coated in ice. Ice buildup on decks and rigging posed a hazard nearly as lethal as enemy fire. These were conditions in which naval engagements could become deadly quickly, not only from shell fire, but from hypothermia, malfunctioning weaponry, and poor visibility. On the 29th of December, a brief dispersal event occurred within the convoy. A wing column and the trawler Visalma lost touch with the main formation during worsening weather. In response, the minesweeper Bramble was detached to search for the missing vessels. Then, on December 30th, a German reconnaissance aircraft sighted and reported the position of the convoy. The message was quickly relayed to Kriegsmarine headquarters, and within hours, Admiral Erich Raeder acted. The sighting confirmed what German command had been anticipating: an eastbound Arctic convoy, exposed and within striking range. Orders were issued immediately. From Altenfjord, Vice Admiral Oskar Kummetz was to lead a task force into the Barents Sea to intercept and annihilate the merchant column. The operation carried considerable risk. Allied heavy units might be lurking, but the potential reward was significant. A successful attack could reaffirm the relevance of the surface fleet in Hitler's eyes and deal a critical blow to the Soviet Union's war logistics during a pivotal phase on the Eastern Front. Kummetz's force included the heavy cruisers Admiral Hipper and Lützow, accompanied by 6 destroyers. Kummetz was issued strict orders. The convoy was to be annihilated, but he was to avoid a pitched battle with superior British forces. This meant that if heavy Royal Navy warships appeared, disengagement was preferable. Still, the priority was clear: maximum destruction of the merchantmen. Capturing merchant captains for interrogation was considered a valuable secondary objective, but enemy survivors were to be left to the sea. No time or risk was to be expended on rescue. From then on, the convoy was shadowed by German submarines. On the evening of December 30th, Hipper and Lützow left Altenfjord and began their sweep toward the reported position of the convoy. To widen the search front and increase the chance of intercepting the scattered convoy, Kummetz divided his formation into 2 groups: Hipper with 3 destroyers to approach from one direction, and Lützow with the remaining 3 from another. The operation was timed to strike the convoy the following morning, around dawn. Unbeknownst to the Germans, the British were alert to the growing threat of surface raiders in the area. Barents' radar-equipped cruisers Jamaica and Sheffield maintained a loose shadow over the convoy, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to close rapidly if surface raiders appeared. The weather, overcast skies, light winds, and patches of snow squalls, favored concealment but also made coordination hazardous. By the 30th, most of the stragglers rejoined the convoy, although Bramble was still a distance away to the north. Despite this ominous absence, Captain Sherbrooke continued his escort duties unaware of the approaching Germans. His formation maintained course in the hostile environment. The primary tactic available to the destroyers, should enemy capital ships appear, was to lay smokescreens and feign torpedo attacks, classic mosquito tactics developed to mislead and deter heavier adversaries. As dawn approached on December 31st, visibility remained patchy. Somewhere to the west, Admiral Barents' cruisers accelerated to over 30 knots. Radio intercepts indicated that enemy forces might be approaching the convoy. The German ships continued to close the distance. Hipper and her destroyers were moving fast through the low light. The morning broke with snow squalls under low cloud. Seas were smooth. Visibility ran about 7 miles to the north and 10 to the south, and a west-northwesterly wind held near 16 knots. JW-51B, now 12 merchant ships under 8 escorts, held its easterly course. To the northwest of the convoy, Admiral Hipper and 3 destroyers advanced. Roughly 50 nautical miles to the south, Lützow and her own trio of destroyers closed in as well. Bramble, the British minesweeper, was 15 nautical miles northeast of the convoy searching for stragglers, while Barents' Force-R cruisers, Sheffield and Jamaica, were about 45 miles north of the convoy. However, Barents believed the convoy lay to his north. He kept his cruisers pressing northeast, chasing a radar contact that turned out to be the trawler Visalma. At 7:18, Hipper's lookouts made out shapes in the gloom, and Friedrich Eckholt was sent to probe. At 8:20, the corvette Hyderabad sighted 2 ships on the starboard quarter but did not report them. At 8:30, Obduret saw 3 German destroyers to starboard and was ordered out. She trailed them around the convoy's stern toward the northwest. At 9:29, Eckholt opened fire at roughly 8,000 yards, and Obdurate turned back with the alarm. Achates started a smokescreen while Obedient and Orwell closed on the flagship. HMS Onslow soon sighted Hipper herself and altered course to intercept, joined by Orwell, Obedient, and Obdurate. HMS Achates was instructed to remain with the convoy and begin laying smoke. At 10:16, Onslow was hit by 8-inch gunfire. The strike tore into the forward structure, killing 17 men and inflicting severe wounds on Captain Sherbrooke. Shrapnel tore across his face, rendering him blind in one eye. With Onslow damaged and forced to withdraw, command passed to Obedient. The British destroyers opened fire and then turned toward Hipper, simulating a torpedo attack. Sherbrooke, recognizing that his destroyers were outgunned, relied on the threat of torpedoes to buy time. The maneuver was a calculated bluff. The destroyers feinted the attack but withheld actual torpedo launches to maintain the illusion. The ruse worked. Hipper withdrew temporarily, constrained by torpedo feints and smoke, though her formal order to avoid unnecessary risk did not arrive until later at 11:37. As the action momentarily paused, HMS Bramble, detached earlier to search for stragglers, was steaming alone some 15 nautical miles northeast of the convoy. The small Halcyon-class minesweeper, armed with only a few 4-inch guns, was ill-suited for surface combat against heavy cruisers. Between 10:36 and 11:06, Admiral Hipper sighted her silhouette and pummeled her with 51 8-inch and 38 4.1-inch shells. Bramble, realizing the odds, attempted to fight back, but was hopelessly outgunned. After this battering, Kummetz detached Friedrich Eckholt and Richard Beitzen, which closed in and finished her off at close range. Bramble went down with all 121 hands. In the chaos of the wider battle, no distress signal reached the convoy, and her disappearance remained a mystery until after the engagement. Hipper soon returned. After Obedient's wireless was destroyed, command shifted again to Obdurate. Hipper then shifted fire toward Obedient and Achates, which were still engaged to the south. Achates, already laying smoke, was struck and badly damaged. Yet she remained on station, continuing to obscure the convoy's position. German coordination between Hipper and Lützow was affected by weather and timing. Though Kummetz had intended a pincer movement, the British destroyers had disrupted the plan. Torpedo feints and smokescreens masked the convoy's position and confused enemy targeting. The escorts, while technically outgunned, kept the formation intact and maintained cohesion under pressure. Meanwhile, it was only when the distant rumble of heavy gunfire reached them that Burnett realized where the fight truly was. He swung his cruisers southeast, closing fast through snow squalls and haze. By late morning, the British light cruisers had slipped into perfect position. At 11:31, HMS Sheffield, followed a minute later by Jamaica, opened fire on Hipper from just 8 miles away. Columns of water erupted around the German cruiser. One shell smashed into her boiler room, flooding it with 1,000 tons of water. Another tore through her hull without exploding. A third set her aircraft hangar ablaze. Caught completely by surprise, Hipper heeled over in a desperate turn to starboard. For Kapitan Zürsi Hartmann, it was a shattering reversal. And for Kummetz, the spectre of prolonged action against British cruisers was exactly what Hitler's standing orders forbade. At 11:37, with his flagship damaged and his plan unraveling, he ordered disengagement. While this was ongoing, the 2 destroyers dispatched to finish off Bramble were still searching for their flagship. At 11:43, still trying to find Hipper, they stumbled into Burnett's cruisers instead. Mistaking Sheffield for the heavy cruiser, Eckholt attempted to form up alongside. It was a fatal error. As the destroyer approached, Sheffield's guns erupted at just 4,000 yards. 16 rapid broadsides smashed the destroyer apart. Flames engulfed her hull as she slid astern and sank with all 340 crew. Richard Beitzen, realizing the truth in time, turned hard away into the haze and escaped. South of the convoy, Lützow finally came into action. Emerging from the snow just before noon, she opened fire. One of her first salvos straddled the freighter Colobra, splinters tearing into the hull and forcing her out of line. A little later, Obdurate was also hit by fragments that caused enough damage to send her to dock for repairs. Lützow's accompanying destroyers, Theodor Riedel and Z-30, added torpedoes and gunfire, but none found a target. By then, the situation for the Germans had already shifted. Sheffield and Jamaica had driven Hipper off, and at 12:03, Admiral Kummetz ordered a withdrawal. Lützow turned northwest to rejoin, but the fighting was winding down. At 12:30, the British and German cruisers exchanged a few long-range salvos through the haze, and 6 minutes later, Barents broke off. The German force retired into the Arctic weather. Barents shadowed them at distance but made no attempt to press. The convoy was able to regroup and resume its eastward course. Not a single merchantman had been lost. For the British escorts, the price was heavy. A Chatis, badly damaged, kept laying smoke until she finally capsized and sank at 1:15 on New Year's Day. Onslow, with 17 men killed and her captain seriously wounded, survived to return to port. Bramble and Friedrich Eckelt had already gone down with all hands. Even so, the convoy was delivered intact. Germany's attempt to cut it apart with a surface strike had failed, broken by the smoke screens, torpedo feints, and the timely arrival of Barents' cruisers. The Battle of the Barents Sea ended as a defensive success for the Royal Navy. In the stillness that followed, convoy JW-51B continued on toward Kola Inlet. Though 2 escorts, Achates and Bramble, were lost, the merchant ships arrived safely. In that respect, the mission had achieved its goal. Despite the odds and the cold, British discipline and steady tactics had held the line. The destroyers had done their job, absorbing pressure, laying smoke, and preventing the German cruisers from reaching the vulnerable heart of the convoy. For the Kriegsmarine, the engagement raised difficult questions. Despite fielding superior firepower, the operation had failed to produce results. Coordination between Hipper and Lützow faltered, and caution, rooted in standing orders, prevented commanders from pressing their advantage. It wasn't a collapse, but it was enough to prompt internal criticism. Hitler, frustrated by the outcome and the lack of clear success, ordered a major reassessment of surface fleet priorities. Soon after, Grand Admiral Raeder stepped down, replaced by Karl Donitz, head of the U-boat arm. Surface operations would continue, but the emphasis was shifting. Submarines, not cruisers, would carry the weight of naval operations going forward. For the Arctic convoys, the episode offered a temporary reprieve, but the battle hadn't ended the threat. Other convoys would follow, other German raids would be attempted, and the long journey to the Soviet north remained as hazardous as ever. This was not a turning point, but it was a moment that revealed how even limited actions could ripple outward, reshaping strategy in quiet but lasting ways. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave a like. It really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.